everybody, how you doing? Yeah. Good to see ya. It's good to be back in Chicago. When I was a young man, Chicago was the big city that we visited. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. So, yeah, we would drive 8 hours to come up here and go to the Sears Tower and see all the sights. So, things are a little different for me now. Now I usually just see insides of hotels and insides of conference centers, but I'm glad to see you guys here. What we're going to do today is I actually start with the Q&A. Main reason for that is that the presentation part is a reading, and I'm going to read from Stormlight 5 today, right? Now, here's the problem. I have read from Stormlight 5 all of the parts that are non-spoilery for people who haven't read the previous Stormlight books. I've already done that, everything I have. So this one will be slight spoilers. Well, yeah, more than slight. So that's why I do the Q&A first, because that way I can do the reading at the end. And anyone who's really sensitive to spoilers, maybe you're in the middle of Rhythm of War or something, we'll give you a chance to sneak out so you don't have to hear the spoilers. And that way you can see the rest of, you can see at least the Q&A and stuff. So we will actually start with the Q&A, warning you ahead of time, I tend to go off on questions. I tend to tangent a bit. So I'll be telling some stories and things as we get Q&A. Now, one request. Your questions to me should be phrased in a way as to not spoil any book. This is hard, I know, right? Sometimes if it's just like a minor spoiler or something irrelevant, you can talk around it and I'll get the idea. But there are people in here who have read some of my books. There are people who have read none of my books. There are people in the middle of the book that you want to ask a question about. So, no spoilers, all right? And we're going to do the question and answer from the two mics here, and we're going to let you just get in line, start throwing things at me, and I'll start throwing answers back at you, all right? So, you are first. Go ahead. Yes, yes, there we are.
So good to meet you. Sorry if this has been asked before, but I know for a lot of your books, and for Stormlight specifically, mental health is a very big theme. Did you always intend that, or did it kind of just happen during the writing process?
What an excellent question. So, the mental health themes in my books, did I intend that? Did I kind of develop that as it went along? I'll repeat the questions because we're actually going to record this. In case you want to see it, it'll be on my YouTube channel. So I want to get them, I have a separate mic right here for them. So it's a little of both, if that makes sense. But when I was in college, one of my good friends, you can find him actually in Stormlight, Dre from Bridge 4. One of my very dear friends, he eventually made his way to being a doctor in the Navy. He began in psychology, and I thought, I want to be a novelist, right? I think that I should take some psychology classes. But he was in these really cool, interesting psychology classes that they don't let non-majors into. They wouldn't let me register. So I just started going to the classes with him, right? Universities don't like this because, you know, you're supposed to pay, but I was a full-time student, and the professors loved it. They're like, oh, you care? Have a seat, right? And so I sat through quite a bit of, you know, his kind of high-level psychology classes where they were really digging into the interesting things. And this is where I started to pick up on, like, real psychology, not pop psychology, and real definitions and kind of real mental health. And as a writer, I thought, wow, so many of us do this poorly, right? So many of us approach this in a way that actually does harm rather than good. And so it kind of made this sort of decision point for me. Was I going to back off from it and just not make it an issue? Or was I going to include it and kind of lean in and try to do best practices, right? It wasn't so much that I'm like, I want to make this a theme. It was more, if I'm going to do this, I better do it well, if that makes sense. My wife struggles with depression. And as I was developing the Stormlight archive in particular, one thing that a lot of people say, and then she mentioned this, she's like, I'm kind of tired of stories that are only about that, right? Like, if you have depression as a teenager, you'll get one of these teenage problem novels, they call it. Like, here's someone struggling with depression, which can be really helpful, right? But what they don't give you is, here's an epic fantasy story, and someone with depression can be, you know, in an epic fantasy story as well. And it wasn't that I sat down and said, I'm going to do this. I sat down and said, who is this character? If you don't know the history of Kaladin, there's the first time I tried writing The Way of Kings was in 2002. And I had him be this very kind of more cliched, heroic young apprentice character who wins Shardblade and Shardplate and then has to go become, you know, a shard bearer. And that happens in the prologue. You can read that version of it. It's called Way of Kings Prime. We put it for free on my website. We actually gave a free audiobook of it if you want to listen. It's okay. It's not amazing, right? This is early Brandon. This is baby Brandon writing. Kaladin never worked, which is why I never released that book. It had a different name back then, but he never worked. And it wasn't until I had him make different decisions and I built him into a more rounded character that he started working. And his mental health was a part of that. It wasn't the defining feature, but it was definitely part of it. So altogether, I would say, yes, there was some conscious choice, but making it a theme was less, let's make this Brandon Sanderson theme, and it was more, I'm going to do this well. Whatever I do, I want to do it well. So there's your answer. Thank you for the excellent question. Hit me.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, it is quite loud.
Okay, so my name is Simeon. I'm from Chicago by way of Bulgaria. My question is, technologically speaking, what is the difference between space-age Skadrians and space-age Rosharans?
Okay. Ooh, that's not too spoilery. We can do something like that. I probably won't answer it, but it's not too spoilery. I will tell you this. How about this? Number one, I love Bulgaria. Did I see you there when I went to Bulgaria by chance, or any of your friends? You were here, yeah. Bulgaria is the only place I've done a signing where we did it in a mall, and my editor over there is also a DJ. Right? All my other editors in all my other countries, they're what you expect them to be. They, you know, they are people who rarely see the light of day, and when they do, they hiss at it, right? My editor there, same reasons, but it's because he's at the club doing DJ stuff, and he runs this side hustle of publishing fantasy books. So he sat and DJ'd for the crowd, playing music and mixing it during my whole signing. So that was pretty awesome.
I've worked with him.
Yes, so what is the difference between Skadrian science and Rosharan science for the future of the Cosmere? That is a RAFO. However, I have a RAFO card for you. Oh, yes. Becky, you got one. Oh, it's coming over. So that's Scar. Everyone say hi to Scar from Bridge 4. Yeah. When I was filling out Bridge 4's members, I needed some extra characters, and my writing group and friends at the time were like, oh yeah, put me in, put me in, put me in. And so Scar didn't get a choice. He's one of the few people I know who's actually been in the military, so he just went in. He didn't get a say. I'm like, but he and Dre are both military men. Everyone else, they let them choose. And then my friend Ben, if you ever watch our podcast, Ben occasionally makes appearances. He said, do not put me in your book, Sanderson. I know what you'll do to me. No. So he's the only one that's not in there. So a RAFO card. Do you know what one of those is by chance? So, good story time. I warned you all. Way back when little baby Brandon was part of the Wheel of Time fandom. Okay? Yeah. Sorry about Perrin in the show. It's not my fault. I tried. Oh, how I tried. Yeah. They're doing some stuff really well. Perrin, my boy Perrin. Tangent time. I'll get back to this. Everybody, if you happen to not like the show, don't rag on the writers and creators. They tried to. There's certain things, forces moving. You can know that Jeff Bezos at one point said, I want Game of Thrones, buy it for me. And they're like, you can't have Game of Thrones. He's like, buy me something that is my Game of Thrones. And there are certain forces at work. Rafe really went to bat for me. I presented a completely different thing to do with Perrin that would still get what they wanted. Minor spoilers for the television show's first episode. But instead of the big event that happens there, I'm like, what if he wounds Master Luhan? He's worried about the rage inside of him. You can get all the same beats without doing the thing you did, and then he also won't be traumatized for the entire first season, and you can actually go on a fun adventure with his friends. And they took it all the way to the higher-ups and fought for my version of it. I even wrote it out for them, and they said no. So, it's their show. They can do what they want, but they did the Rafe went straight up with my version. So you know, there's some very wonderful things about that show. Most of them are people named like Rosamund and people like that. And there are some really good writers on that show, and they are working very hard to give you a fantastic experience. There's just lots of forces at play. I'll just say that. So, way back when, Baby Brandon, he's part of the Wheel of Time fandom, right? Wheel of Time fandom was hardcore. Yes, they were absolutely hardcore, and Robert Jordan often didn't want to answer questions because they would spoil future books. And so he developed something he called Read and Find Out. And if a fan asked him a question that was a little too detailed, a little too, like it would spoil things he's planning, or it might just give too much out early, he would say, RAFO, read and find out. It became one of his catchphrases. When I was asked to finish The Wheel of Time, the first time I flew out to meet Harry, it's the same day that she gave me the ending of The Wheel of Time, all the materials that he had written. She also gave me something, and it's a bracelet, which I still have. And it was a fan gave, it's a charm bracelet that said RAFO on it. She handed it to me and said, I'm bequeathing you the RAFO. It is yours now. You may use the RAFO as you wish. And so I keep that at home. It's like there's an actual kilogram somewhere, right? Like, it's the actual RAFO. Whoever bears this is the bearer of the RAFO. And so I printed out cards because I always felt bad saying, no, I'm not going to answer your question. So at least you get a memento of the fact that you asked a very smart question that I'm not going to answer yet. Hello, how are you?
Well, how are you?
Nice costume.
Thank you. Pleasure, Master.
Yeah.
So one of the aspects I liked of the Stormlight archive was Renarin. As somebody on the spectrum, immediately picked it up, and I'm like, wow, there's representation of me. Because of that, I want to ask, when are we getting more Renarin?
When are you getting more Renarin? Oh, excellent question. So, story time. One of my very first attempts at doing this as an Elantris, and I did it poorly. This is when I was starting to take these classes, but it was before I had taken them. So if you go read there's a side character who's on the spectrum, and it's very pop psychology, right? It's basically what you get by watching movies about people on the spectrum before they started to figure out that it was a spectrum, right? And, you know, I wrote that book, and then I wrote 7 others, and I got way better. But that's the book that sold. And I always thought, you know, I did that a little wrong. So I started getting to know people. When I was in college at this very time, I knew several people on the spectrum, but we didn't really have the language for it back in the 90s that we now do. And I started to kind of dig in deep and understand how this works. I now have a child on the spectrum. And I've really been able to kind of learn a whole lot. But the interesting thing is I wrote this before he was diagnosed, right? And so it's kind of cool that I was able to I'm glad that I had patient people who were willing to help me do better. Renarin and Steris are the two big examples of me just kind of actually digging into what does it feel like, what is it like, and things like that. You will get the most Renarin you've ever gotten so far in Stormlight 5. Now let me warn you, he's not a main character yet. So you read that, he won't get as much as you want until like books 6 through 10. But for now, you're going to get more than you've ever gotten. So there we are.
Hello.
Hey.
My name is Michael. I live up near Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, sweet. I enjoy Madison. Good convention there, Sci-Fi Con, right downtown Madison.
Haven't been to that one, but we do love the city. So, I'm curious. With the incredible ability Bondsmiths have to reassemble things,
Yes.
would they theoretically be able to reassemble Adonalsium himself out of the shards if they were detached from their hosts?
So this is kind of a chicken and the egg question. Would they be able to reassemble Adonalsium? Can you use Adonalsium's own power to reassemble Adonalsium? Can someone externally do it? I'm going to give you a RAFO on that right now, but I'm going to warn you, this idea of using something to reassemble itself is more tricky than you might assume. All right? Good question.
Hello.
Hi.
My name's Flynn. I live in Kenosha, which is southern Wisconsin.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of the Mistborn books. That's how I got into your series. It's a fantastic piece of writing just on its own. Then I discovered that there were multiple eras, which is a fantastic, one of the most interesting parts to me about it. Now, stop me if this is too spoiler, but in anticipation of the Ghost Bloods era
Yes.
that you're writing, you mentioned that you also want to write a Space Age series, obviously, after that. You mentioned at one point, briefly, entertaining the idea of doing a cyberpunk series in
Yes.
between that. And I just want to ask, what is the status of that? I know it's obviously very demanding, but...
Yeah, so what's the status of that? That's great. So, story time. So, why did I decide to do what I did with Mistborn, for those who don't know? For those who don't know, Mistborn I originally pitched as a trilogy of trilogies. This is because my idea, and I still remember explaining this for the first time to my wife at Outback Steakhouse. Yep, back in like 2006 or 7, back when I was working on the first one. And I noticed that I love the fantasy genre. I consider myself a scholar of the fantasy genre. I've read a ton in it. I've seen how it evolved. And at the time, I'm always looking for what have people not done. I feel like fantasy as a genre, it still has, and back then in particular, had a lot of room to grow. This is because I feel like Grandpa Tolkien came along, sauntered up, released just these amazing books that no one had any idea what to do with, right? Created a new subgenre, and then sauntered off into the sunset and said, do with them what you will. I don't think people, young people today can understand what an impact that had, right? It's very difficult to find anything before Tolkien that truly explores secondary world fantasy that doesn't have connections to our world. And even Middle-earth, you can argue, has a bit. But even things like Conan were supposed to take place in our prehistory, our world. And you can find a few in the 1800s. They're very whimsical, fairy tale-ish sort of things. Tolkien taking that and just wholesale inventing epic fantasy meant that basically all of the 70s and 80s and a big chunk of the 90s were like people scrambling to figure out what he did and trying to catch up. It's like somebody walked into Greek times and said, here's a mobile phone. Bye-bye, guys, right? That's Tolkien. And so I grew up in that era, and there's a lot of fantastic authors doing a lot of really cool things, but it was all very deeply Tolkien influenced, as you might expect. And so as my generation was like responding a little bit against that, saying, all right, what can we do that hasn't been done? And a lot of books have this sort of magic going away because of Tolkien with the elves going away. And so you find a lot in my generation of the magic coming back, right? That's kind of a core theme you can see not just among me, but other writers of my generation in fantasy. One thing I had never seen is I had never seen somebody take an epic fantasy story, a trilogy, and then say that is the foundation of religion and mythology in a modern day trilogy. And then take that and say, yes, and then that's the foundation of the scientific understanding that leads to space travel in a more space opera sort of way. Kind of that whole continuum. You had seen things very frequently with it's a fantasy world that used to be Earth, but you'd never seen this. And so I wanted to do it. It was one of those key ideas, just like I'd never seen a fantasy heist. And some of these things. I had not seen people really take science fiction rigor for world building and apply it to epic fantasy. There's just some things that I'm like, nobody has done this, I'd better do it. So I pitched a trilogy of trilogies to my editor. And I still remember his response, Moshe. He's like, wow, you're ambitious. And I said, you have no idea, bud. You have no idea. But I love this idea. However, then the wheel of time hit me like a freight train, right? And it took my career places that I didn't know it was going to go. And it took about 5 years of my dedicated writing time to do those 3 books correctly, which meant that I couldn't get to Era 2 of Mistborn when I wanted to. But what I could do is write a shorter series that was, particularly the first book, were very standalone, that was just more fast-paced, a little bit less continuity-laden, but of course, if you read that series, it goes there. That was after the Wheel of Time was done. So basically, I interjected this middle series because I wanted to be back on schedule, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get there for a while. But then someone very smart, a fan, came and said, now that there's 4 books in the Wax and Wane series, which became Era 2, and you were planning 9 other books, if you do the math, one more trilogy puts you at 16, which if you've read the Mistborn books is like a very important, relevant number. And I'm like, oh, wow. Oh, wow. If I write just 3 more books. So keep them shorter like Wax and Wane, right? I'm pretty much in my head committed to doing that. That we're gonna have all 5 eras now. So that gives us epic fantasy, steampunk, modern day urban fantasy, cyberpunk, and space opera, right? And so that is currently the plan. Now here's the thing. I don't want to promise too many sequels because, there's only so much writing time, even though I rebel against that and sometimes grab a time turner and write an extra book. I can't do that too much or it screws up continuity in our reality, right? You gotta watch out for that. If you use the time turner too much, people are like, but why not save Harry's parents? And things like that, it just is bad for you. So I can't do it, but yes, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to do that. So, yep, yeah. Hello.
My name is Kaylee. I'm currently local. You might remember me from sightings in the 2010s.
Back when I was nobody. Thank you.
You came to my high school, and I was a very, very overexcited teenager to meet you.
That is awesome.
There in Colorado.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so I'm hoping that this question isn't too spoilery. I'm going to try to word it in a way that isn't spoilery.
Circumlocute. That's what we say.
Okay, so you said before that a certain main Stormlight character's younger brother would have been a Lightweaver. What would his truths have been?
Oh, that's a very deep RAFO. So you've got your card. That's a RAFO. That's a RAFO. That's definitely a RAFO. I can give you the first one, though. I can give you the first one. He was going to have to acknowledge that he was not the person he was trying to be, but he could be someone better. All right? But I'll leave you there. I can't get you the rest of them. All right, good question.
Hello, Ezekiel from the Burbs.
Hey, Ezekiel.
I don't think this is too spoilery. So in Words of Radiance, you started off a chapter talking about breaths, calling it the life of men. And then immediately afterwards, you have Kaladin bring up how the Alethi are soulcasted into statues. And I believe you said in a live stream that you can't soulcast stone. I mean,
very hard.
Yeah, but you can awaken soulcasted stone. So was that intentional?
So it's intentional to get you thinking. Do not expect this to be a major foreshadowing point. Main reason being that while I am, for those, there might be like spouses in here or kids who've come with parents who are like, why are they asking these very detailed questions? I know most of you know this, but all of my epic fantasy books share a continuity hidden behind the scenes, right? This started, story time. This started because back in the 90s, shared continuity was a frightening thing. One of my favorite shows of all time is Deep Space Nine, the Star Trek show. Oh, we got some fellow geezers here, right? Who like the best Star Trek. Next Generation is awesome. Next Generation has the best episodes of Star Trek, but Deep Space Nine has the best story of Star Trek. Does that make sense? And so you can watch the DVD extras where they would have to take their episodes that shared continuity and hide them from the executives and show them the goofy Ferengi episode about the little bumbling Ferengis doing funny things to distract the studio executives, so that they didn't know that there is this giant shared continuity that they were trying to build across seasons, because everyone would have said no. Now, the nerds all knew that this is something awesome, but the executives, and this time the editors in New York, were scared of it because they were frightened that if too much continuity happened, you would start losing readers who didn't keep up on it all, which is a genuine concern, right? Anyone in here been like, I can't keep up on the MCU anymore, there's just too much stuff, therefore I'm not as excited as I once was, right? That's the worry, right? And so to do something like I'm doing, it's a dance. And the dance is to try to make sure each independent story works fantastically well on its own without any knowledge of the other pieces. That doesn't mean I won't bring those pieces in. In fact, I do quite a bit. But I don't want to build huge climactic moments based on knowledge of a magic system that is not native to a given planet. If that makes sense?
So we shouldn't expect a statue of the Lopin running around in the future?
I mean, nothing's impossible. But I wouldn't expect it. Yeah, thank you. I actually use this, give applause. Oh, you have the guitar, good. Yeah, so we'll just go on to the next question. Yeah, I could go story time again, but there's actually a lot of people in line, so we'll do questions. Yeah.
Hi, I'm John from here.
Excellent.
I have to pick one of these, so this is the one. Was Khriss one of Hoids' apprentices?
Was Khriss one of Hoids' apprentices? Excellent question. He does not count her in his list, his short list of apprentices. you will find a lot of people he deeply influenced that he doesn't count. And Khriss definitely has, and he have some history. All right, excellent costume.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Angela from Chicago, and I was wondering if you have any music associations with anything or anybody.
Good question. So music associations with anything or anybody, particularly my writing, I assume. Because my wife and I have some songs. She would say, she would hate that I say this, but our song is Little Birdhouse in Your Soul by They Might Be Giants. Not your question, but I'm story timing. This is because anytime she has a song stuck in her head, I start singing that to annoy her by getting that stuck in her head instead. So it's a great reason to have a couple song, right? Music associations. I do have several playlists on Spotify, which are the actual playlists that I listen to while working on given books. So if you go to my playlist, Octavia's around, I think it's Mistborn 1 on Spotify. You can find, for instance, my Stormlight 3 and 4 writing playlist, and I would deeply associate a lot of those songs with things like this. I am known, I'll tell you this one. This isn't on the playlist because I try to keep it themed to at least a certain feel most of the time. But any time in the books when I was writing Zeth, particularly when Zeth does the things that Zeth does, I would turn on Daft Punk. Right? Particularly 2007 Alive, their live album. R.I.P. Daft Punk. The robots blew up. Well, one robot blew up. Yes, but regardless. So there's one music association. If I hear something from that album, I imagine people flying toward the ceiling. Uh-huh. Yes. Ooh, applause. Go ahead.
Hi, Brandon.
Hi.
I'm Bondsmith. I'm from Chicago. Huge fan.
Thank you.
Trying not to get RAFO'd, but for the Arcanists in the audience, I had a question about Odium's intent, pun intended, for going after ambition.
Okay.
So obviously with Devotion and Dominion teaming up, he didn't want to twosome over there.
Yep.
Are we ever going to learn more about the background on Threnody? Because Khriss implies that there was always investiture there before the clash. So I'm looking for a little bit of information about the evil.
Ooh, okay. Before the clash, the evil was not the evil. Okay? It is the clash that warped it. Secret Project 5 has a splintered piece of ambition as a plot point. Some of these books get, like, if I'm doing like a book all that stuff I said about not having to know multiple magic systems, that goes out the window for things like Secret Project 5, right? Those are books that are about that. They're kind of but anyway, so you will find out some more there. It's going to take me a long time to get to what actually happened with Ambition, why, and things like that. Know that Odium was not expecting it to be as hard as it was, and ended up severely wounded in that clash.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Brendan.
Hey.
Chuck from Chicago. A question about the Stormlight archive.
Go for it.
In the latest book, the Stormfather references a man long ago that made him laugh once.
Mm-hmm.
Will we ever get a interlude chapter or a short story about the one time the Stormfather laughed?
RAFO. Yeah, there's your RAFO. Get your card. Thank you for the question. All right.
Hello, Brandon. Khriss from Omaha, Nebraska.
Ooh, hey, Omaha. Yeah, eat a Runza for me.
Yeah.
I miss Runza.
My question is, did Adonalsium ever create any avatars?
Did Adonalsium ever create any avatars? That's... So, I'm not going to RAFO this. I'm going to give you an answer, but here's the thing on this answer. Some of these things are canon in stuff I've done so far that I may not canonize going forward, right? The answer is yes. In original outlines going back to Dragonsteel and things like this, the answer is yes, that you would have seen that. Will I do that when I write the actual series? I cannot guarantee. So it's a tentative yes, but it is not it's not canon yet. I'll RAFO that for you. You're fishing for a card, aren't you? Uh-huh. It's actually really easy to get a RAFO card out of me. You just have to be like, so how's the book end? Yeah. I actually usually jokingly say, well, to that one, but yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Brandon. My name's Josh. Just, I love the world building that you've done in a lot of your books. I was just wondering if you had any advice for if you're playing like a D&D or any type of like that, what you would recommend for where to start when building such an in-depth world?
Where to start when building a world if you're a GM building. Interconnectivity. So Sanderson's laws, we should watch a thing on, are more for narrative purposes. If you're actually strictly looking at world building, more important than any Sanderson's laws, I feel, is the Dune principle. When you read Dune, or now we can watch the fantastic films, you will notice that the interesting world building elements that Frank Herbert added become integral to one another. Your economy, your religion, your ecology, all are tied to the spice in really interesting ways. And that interconnectivity is part of what makes for a really immersive, powerful, interesting world. Now, it can become a one-trick pony, particularly in gaming, right? Where you're gaming, you're like, and it's also related to this thing. And they're like, of course it is, right? So you do have to watch that. But if you set up and found your world in the right way, you can make everything spin around a fantastical resource or around, a singular event that has huge ramifications, such as the assassination of a king. And you can build out from that and make everything connect together. And why this is so helpful is it is difficult, particularly in gaming, for you to get your players immersed in this huge thing you've built. Because you might have pages and pages and pages, but what they're mostly doing is kicking down doors, stabbing things in the eyes, and picking their pockets, right? And you want them to engage with the world building so they get invested in the story, so that when kicking down doors and stabbing things through the eyes gets a little dull, they actually can go engage with the interesting world and story. You need to make easy on-ramp to them to get into that. And some of these hooks, such as everything being interconnected, really give you those on-ramps and help you step them into going from murder hobo to political machinations involved in the actual fate of the world. So that's my advice for you. It depends on your group, as always, with anything in gaming. Yeah. I tried very hard in one of my old famous campaigns to get rid of the murder hobo mentality. But then Dan Wells, who I podcast with, created a character that was like fundamental. If you don't know what murder hobo is, it's a joke we use in the gaming community to reference how player characters in role-playing games, they're supposed to be like fated heroes, or maybe not fated, but the heroes who save the world. They're epic fantasy protagonists. But what do they actually do? They don't live anywhere. They're homeless people who go around finding places to kill things, get their money, and buy better equipment to kill things. And so someone jokingly called them murder hobos, and so it's been kind of become a thing. But I tried very hard, but then Dan built his whole character around the idea of someone who found that aspect fun. It was very hard to get that group dislodged from any sort of such thinking.
Hi, Brandon. My name is Steve, and I'm here from the Chicago area. You've spoken at length about real-world inspirations for virtual and other things. I'm curious if you have any stories about the inspiration of Lightsong.
Oh, yeah. Ooh. So, inspiration of Lightsong. By the way, I'll probably only be able to get to a few more questions, so I'm going to let most of you sit down. I'm going to take 2 at each one. So, the 2, you who asked the question, the person behind him with the beard, and then the 2 of you, the rest of you, I'm sorry. You can't complain, Evgeny. I'm having dinner with you tonight. He's one of our arcanists. Yeah. So I'm sorry, there are a lot of you, but let's get these and then we'll do the reading. All right, origins of Lightsong. Lightsong actually has a pretty simple origin. As I was working, the whole Warbreaker thing book came about from a couple of things. Number one, I had written Elantris and I had written Mistborn, and my editor said, I don't want you to get pigeonholed into doing the same thing. Elantris has this really dreary landscape, and Mistborn has this really dreary landscape. Can you do something more colorful? And I said, oh, you bet I can. I'd already kind of been planning it, but it was kind of funny that he said that. And Lightsong started as a simple question to myself. What if there were a God who didn't believe in his own religion? Right? Where do I go from that, right? And I thought that concept was really interesting. I could dig into it like, someone who is worshipped but is kind of a conscientious objector to the entire religion built around him. And so I'm like, who would this person be? The other thing that was going on is I did want to play with humor in different ways in Warbreaker because I was looking to do some different things than I had done in Mistborn to have a contrast. And so it kind of naturally evolved into Rupert Everett from the Ideal Husband, right? Just kind of suave, jokester, Oscar Wilde-esque person trapped in this whole thing. And I would say those all together are what produced Lightsong. Hey.
My name is Nisar. I'm from Boston. I saw you at Dragonsteel last year.
Oh, awesome.
My question is around connections between corrupted investiture on different planets. We have the Shroud, we have Midnight Essence, we have the Nightmares,
yes,
and we have Nightblood. All of them have like oozy black smoke.
Yep.
Are they all like connected somehow with the corrupted investiture of Odium, Ambition?
So yes and no. So the question is all of these different kind of manifestations. We've got the Midnight Essence, we've got the Shroud, we've got Nightblood. Are they connected? Are they all related in some way to Odium or Ambition? So the answer is no to the second. So when I was building the Cosmere, one of the things that I knew is that I wanted to explore magic system really in depth. And in order to do that, I built fundamental principles by how magic investiture would manifest, and I wanted it to be consistent. For instance, I wanted the rules, if you're making illusions in one world, I wanted those illusions to behave a lot the same way that they would on other worlds. And so I built these fundamental principles that I build up from. And one of those fundamental principles is about investiture that is trying to become alive and is being held back by something. And that is where you get Midnight Essence sort of things. It's like one step from being able to become self-aware, but it's being held back. And there's even kind of some frustration in there, as much as something not truly self-aware can have. So if you watch for that theme, you'll see that more and more. Yep.
Hey there, my name is Rick. I only just took an 8-hour drive here from Lincoln.
Oh, hey, great. Colby Ridge popcorn. Yeah. I actually order that in from my home theater. You can get a big bag of it, so yeah.
I'll make sure I get a rundown on the way home for you.
Yeah.
My question is, I've been standing up with this entire time trying to figure out how to say this. If someone else were to grab a shard, would the God metal change?
Yes. There's a whole bunch of asterisks, okay? Yeah, so there you go, all right? It's as far as I can go on that one. All right.
Hi, in the Cytoverse you introduced 2 slugs that
Yes.
you can go into, and I would really like to know what they do.
So one of them's an illusion slug. Is that one of the ones we've already talked about?
But that was, I knew that one.
Okay.
You listed it with the plushies. You just said gray slug.
Gray slug. So you will find out what the gray slug does in the sequel series that I just finished reading and editing the first book of. So that's a RAFO. You can have a card, but it is a promise that it's coming. All right.